Welcome to the Startup Grind.
So a little bit of history. Startup Grind is an international group. It's in 50 cities. It was started by Derek Anderson in Silicon Valley in a garage in Palo Alto. And he actually, his world headquarters, he's got cardboard cutouts of Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates next to him for all of his conference calls. So they have the right attitude. And he's right down the street from Google and all the big players up there. And his vision really was to get every city in America that wants to have knowledge and networking about startups to have a monthly group where great leaders who can teach the startup community about how to build and scale and fund and sell your startups can have a monthly place to mix and meet those leaders. So I met Derek at South by Southwest in Austin this last March, and he said he was really looking for someone in Vegas, and I said, okay, I've been really looking to do something for the community that could bring together all the disparate parts of Las Vegas, the downtown community, the west side community, east side, and the people who come into town for conferences on the Strip. And so we struck a deal, and we're going to be doing this monthly. We're going to move it around. The ideal is to have 3 on the west side, 3 on the east side, 3 on the Strip, and 3 downtown. And I've already tonight been having conversations with UNLV, so hopefully our first east side one will be there. We've got a few other folks on the east side who have also expressed some interest. And looking at a few places downtown, and then the Strip will typically be when it's linked into a particular trade show. For example, both Brock and I are speaking at the Inside Bitcoins conference in December at the Bellagio, and we both know the people putting on the show, so we're hoping to have something the night before that conference and bring in one of the top 2 or 3 people in the Bitcoin world. So Brock seemed to be the absolute best person to kick this off with, so I'm delighted he's in town for G2E, that Brock was able to be our first guest. A little bit about Brock. Brock is a little over 30 years old, but he's got a resume that looks like he should be 75 years old. So Brock started out in business as an actor. He was in the Mighty Ducks and Rich Kid and a few other things. And then he took the money he made as a child actor, and instead of what everybody else does when they move to LA and gets out of acting, and goes into producing and directing, he said, no, I think I want to do a startup. And so he raised $85 million with your partners for your first startup?
Close enough. It was 88 and we spent 96.
So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons from the dot-com boom and bust, and what to not do this time around. And he has since then started 9 other companies. And so this is a fireside chat format. So ladies and gentlemen, Brock Pierce.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to start out with what did you learn from the dot-com boom and bust, the period, good and bad?
Well, I mean, it was an exciting time, and I don't think we'll ever see anything again like it, in the sense that you have this incredibly disruptive sort of technology coming on the scene, and everyone recognizing its ability to disrupt, but really having almost no experience. Specifically, the large companies, most of the investors, pretty much all, call it the governance and supervision of the sector, had limited understanding, and it allowed entrepreneurs to do things that they probably shouldn't have been able to do, like 17-year-olds raising $88 million. Just an incredible sort of period of history, and I was glad that I got to be a part of it. What did I learn from it? Mostly, kind of what not to do. I think from an idea perspective, we were spot on. And I think what we did is what everybody else was doing, which was you spent very, very aggressively at the time, and this was the model to try and take a very strong market-leading position in the sector you were playing in. And for most companies that didn't work, but for some of them it did. Amazon, I think, being a great example of that. And to some extent, they're still doing that today. And I think it's going to pay off. I think Amazon will probably be the highest revenue company in the world, and not too far from it. But in terms of timing, that business at the time was called Den, or Digital Entertainment Network. I had come out of the entertainment space, and there was a guy that started one of the world's first ISPs, which sold for $3.5 billion. He had come to Los Angeles and had an interest in doing a business around where internet sort of meets entertainment and convergence. He was meeting with all the movie studio heads, all the TV network heads, and at the time none of them could spell the internet. And a friend of mine said, well, you should meet this young guy, Brock. He's grown up in the entertainment business. He's net savvy. He's got a lot of opinions about the future of media. So we had gotten together, and I said, I think people in the future are going to be running around with camcorders, ended up being phones, recording video, uploading it to the internet, and you're going to have this kind of user-generated content that's going to be distributed over the net. I think you're going to see original programming produced for the internet, which is now what you're seeing with all these YouTube channels. And the idea there was that broadcast television was trying to reach the broadest audience possible because you had limited, sort of numbers of channels. Cable was going after, slightly more narrow audiences, again, because there were more channels, but the internet had essentially unlimited channels, and so you'd start to see programming created to serve, essentially every underserved audience. And then we'd have licensed and repurposed programming, the idea that you'd be able to see the articles of clothing and various things from a product placement perspective that was in the content, click on it, purchase it. We created words like the webisode, so I gave him sort of this vision I had of how the internet was going to disrupt the world of media. And he's like, oh my God, you get it. And so we started the company the next day. I dropped out of college in my first semester, and it was pretty funny. I remember some of the first meetings back to the studio heads and network heads, kind of pitching them these visions. And the response, at least at the beginning of this is call it early 97 time period, was, you'll never convince me in a million years that people are going to watch video on their computers. That's why we have televisions. It was an interesting time. We were spot on, but the lesson I learned there is called market timing. Idea was right, but broadband penetration didn't roll out at the rate that was forecasted, and we were off by probably about 10 years. YouTube was probably lucky to have exited in the way that it did because the cost structure around bandwidth at the time and the monetization opportunities in terms of what ad inventory was selling for, the model was fundamentally broken. There was only maybe 2 or 3 companies in the world that could afford to actually own YouTube. That was Google and Microsoft, and it's a business that wasn't viable, and they should have been bought for zero. So good for them, because it wasn't really until the last couple of years where we reached that inflection point where bandwidth costs had dropped far enough and ad sort of monetization around internet videos kind of reached a point where the business became viable. Yeah, so probably off by more than a decade.
And I think if you come away, and obviously we have another 45 minutes or so talking, but you come away from 2 words as a startup founder that you should remember, it's market timing. And Brock and I have both been across multiple ups and downs of the cycle. When the dot-com crash happened, they asked Paul Otellini, who was the CEO of Intel at the time, is Intel going to survive? And he said, son, I'm old enough to have seen 6 deaths of the computer industry predicted, and Intel will survive. So, I always like to say that it's, the technology adoption that's been happening over the last 20, 30 years really should have the market timing horizon of a biotech company, because biotech companies don't make money for 10, 15 years and then become huge, right, John? Right. And yet, they expect that everything's going to happen in 2 years. And so what Brock really was looking to create and got the money that, if the investors were patient, would have created, was essentially what YouTube and Machinima and everybody else is doing now. It's just that, all these great ideas didn't work with, 14.4 bandwidth and having people just not having quite come to the idea of being able to take things with video cameras, et cetera. But now that's obviously created a huge, multi-billion-dollar opportunity for Google.
Yeah, even if the company had survived, because your idea may make it, your company will kind of bridge the gap, but if too much time goes by before you're able to generate revenue, before you're able to build audience, even if the business survives, you as a founder will probably never make any money because the company will have been recapped once, twice, maybe even 3 times.
And the other thing, though, is that the opportunity of that is that we would not have the cheap bandwidth that we have now if it wasn't for all these companies that raised billions and billions of dollars, like Global Crossing, and then were bought for pennies on the dollar, and then all of a sudden it didn't cost you $500 to get broadband, it cost you $20 a month. And you obviously were able to take advantage of that sort of in your, F. Scott Fitzgerald said there's no second acts in American life, and I think Brock's on about act 10 right now, and he's a little over 30. But, sort of moving on from that, you then ended up starting a number of gaming companies. We'll talk a little bit about the fast growth of IGE, and then you ended up buying a company called Xfire that sold for $100 million, and you bought it back for pennies on the dollar. But let's start with IGE. How did IGE come to bear after the implosion of the data network?
Well, I had another idea around the same time, because I grew up playing games, like most young boys. And that was that people playing games had a desire to buy virtual currency and virtual goods. And I recognized that just because something was intangible didn't make it any less valuable. You know, it's the digital world very much mimics the analog world, because we as consumers are still the same people. The same things that motivate us in the analog world, you know, typically motivate us in the digital world. We just behave a little bit differently, but we're still motivated by the same things. So that was, I think, at the time, an interesting insight, which was pretty novel. And I started a business to take advantage of that trend, making a market for cards in a digital collectible card game, if you're familiar with things like Pokemon or Magic the Gathering. And I contacted the game company and said, well, people go to baseball card stores, they go to comic book shops to buy secondary cards, because they don't want to have to buy hundreds or thousands of packs to get that one card that might be missing from their collection. And I said, I'd like to replicate the model in the analog world and buy packets of cards from you in bulk and have the right to sell them. They said, hey, that's great, you know, that's how it works offline, might as well do it the same way online. I built a nice little business. Obviously this other thing distracted me, so I shut it down, mostly because the game never got more than 5,000 users. So it had you know, some issues around total addressable market and scalability. But I went back to that same concept following the dot-com bust, largely because I was unemployable. You know, at that point I was a washed-up actor. I had blown through $100 million of other people's money. I dropped out of college in my first semester, and unfortunately, no one wanted to invest in the internet. So I had to take what little money I had left and start something. So I started a company called IGE, which made a market for virtual currency and virtual goods in what were the emerging, massively multiplayer games market. You know, the first of those being Ultima Online, and then EverQuest, and then most of you have probably heard of World of Warcraft and that sector early on in its development. And so what happened is players that had too much time on their hands and had more virtual currency and virtual goods than they needed to enhance their game experience, and also because they were probably playing more than they should, or a little short on finances. And then there were a lot of people that didn't have the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 hours a week to, you know, spend playing the game to get the things that they wanted. So I made a market for those people that lacked discretionary time but had expendable income. And I took that business from 0 to $100 million in revenue in a few years. We were extremely profitable. And I had to do it with raising no money, because at the time there was no one that would invest in the internet. And so that went quite well. One of the problems I experienced early on was that there were a lot more people that wanted to buy virtual currency and virtual goods in the Western world than there were that wanted to sell. And I recognized that some of the people that were selling me these things were coming from emerging markets like Russia, China, Latin America, because all they needed was a computer, the game software, and an internet connection, and they could make $100, $200, $300, $400, $500 a day, maybe even $1,000 if you were really, really good. And that was an incredible income stream for a lot of people in the emerging markets. And so, recognizing that trend, I moved to China and set up a business and a supply chain there, which eventually led to being about 400,000 people in China that were playing video games professionally to sell to me that I could supply to the Western world. So that was a fun little experience.
So, so it's interesting that you raised $88 million and it turned into nothing, and then you bootstrapped and had a $100 million company. So obviously that's not the way that it normally operates. Let's flash forward a little bit.
It's actually not uncommon. It's a necessity. You'll actually see a lot of people accomplish amazing things because they have no choice and their back is up against a wall, and desperation can deliver some results. You'll often see, I think, second-time entrepreneurs are the ones that I'm normally least interested in backing, because they're often, if they've been successful in having an exit and they've made some money, they are not as motivated as they were when they were living on ramen noodles, and they often have a bit of hubris because they've been successful. And I find that normally you get your ass kicked in those situations, and then you come back, and a third-time entrepreneur is typically fantastic if they still got the desire to work that hard.
So let's talk a little bit about raising money, because you're both simultaneously not only a serial entrepreneur but a parallel serial entrepreneur. So that you've gone and created like Bill Gross did with Idea Lab, and like a few other folks have done, I mean, really kind of a handful, who've been successful at it, created numerous companies over a short period of time, typically around 1 or 2 value propositions, in your case, digital currency, virtual currency, and online gaming. Can you talk a little bit about the discipline to sort of manage multiple entities at once, and then what your strategy has been on bootstrapping versus looking to get funding?
Well, I'll answer the second question first and then the first. But bootstrapping is, it's got its benefits in terms of you're ultimately going to own more of your company, but my view of bootstrapping is you do that as long as you have to until you're successfully able to raise money. And normally bootstrapping is not a choice, it's again, it's a necessity. But, and my view is typically if money is available, often raise it, because if you do have a big idea and it's something that does have extraordinary potential, the biggest restraint and the thing that's going to prevent you from often being successful is a lack of resources, whether that be human capital, funds, etc. In terms of my model, I stopped being a CEO in 2007 and decided that I'd rather pursue multiple ideas. And so I've operated essentially as an incubator, but without any fixed infrastructure. I come up with ideas, I look at global macro trends, I break down the value chain, I break down the ecosystem, I build, form opinions about what that ecosystem and value chain is going to look like 1, 2, 5, 10 years down the road, and then figure out where there's holes in the market and opportunity. And to the extent that I identify something I like where there's already someone actively playing, I try to acquire the business or invest in the business. And so my model is figure out that idea, identify a capable management team, typically co-founders that are going to be co-founders that are operating as CEO out the gate, CTOs, etc. And then figure out how to capitalize the business and often support them through cutting their first deal so that the business can kind of get up and going. And then I typically maintain a board role as a director or chairman, something along those lines. So that's been my model because I have more ideas than I've got time to pursue, and what allows me to do that is the fact that I'm not actually the CEO. I don't think that you can successfully manage more than one business as CEO. If you're trying to run more than one business as CEO, you're probably failing at your job. If you're responsible for running a business, unless it's a lifestyle business that kind of just takes care of itself, but if you're looking at a growth business, you need to be dedicating 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day to that business, typically 7 days a week. Even when you're with family or on vacation or X, Y, and Z, you're working. I often dream about work, and I think that's often the case with early stage companies. So that's the thing that permits me to do that. And of the 4 things that I described that I do typically when starting a company, the ideas, fairly easy. I got more of them than I could possibly pursue. Funding, as long as the idea and team is right, it's pretty easy to raise money, but it's getting those things far enough along that you can do so. Again, if you have a good idea and the right team, getting those initial deals that'll kickstart a company in place is also pretty easy. The one thing that's really, really difficult is assembling the right team. So the main thing that I do is I'm always looking for really talented, entrepreneurs that have the ability to deliver and execute, but don't necessarily have the right ideas or access to the money. And then my bottleneck and what limits me, from starting as many companies as I'd like is finding teams. When I say easy, that's probably a significant exaggeration. Everything is difficult, in the life of a startup. When I say easy, I mean it's achievable. You should be able to get it done. I look at probably almost everything I do that I consider to be easy is extraordinarily difficult, not just for everybody else, but myself as well.
Well, I've certainly noticed, just knowing you for 10 years or working with you for the last few years, is that the network that you have put together and keep together, not only in terms of just strategic business partners, but investors, and you seem to always be adding to that network, and it never really drops off. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can go and just draw on that. How important is sort of building a network to getting funding?
Well, it's called that network, relationships. On our own, I don't care how smart you are, how talented you are, you're not capable of getting much done, and that's true of everyone, and myself included. What allows us to make things happen is ultimately the relationships that we've developed and maintained over the years. and I treat my investors and I take care of their money, and I treat it better than I would take care of my own. If a business were to sell in a way that my investors lost money, I would normally take it out of whatever I got and make sure that they recouped. And most of the people that I work with from that perspective work with me, time and time again, because they know that I take care of them and look out for their interests. That's also true of, management teams and employees. Almost everyone I've worked with, even after they've gone to work at another company, when I think that they're, well suited for one of the businesses I'm working on, I call them up. I'm saying, "What are you doing? Are you happy?" And they're normally like, "Ready to leave whenever you got something for me to do." And again, it's a matter of developing and then maintaining relationships with people. And I do everything I can to preserve those relationships and treat people well.
So your 9 companies about to be 10. Obviously the first one failed. The other ones, there have been what, 2 exits, 3 exits so far?
Yeah, a couple of exits. Yeah. Some are at scale. I mean, one of the businesses is doing $1 billion a year and is highly profitable.
Yeah. And then you spun off something from that sold to a big company in China.
Yeah, I sold a company last year to Tencent, which is a $50 billion, the largest internet company in China that's public, until Alibaba goes public here. I think they're going out at probably 100+ billion.
Yeah. And then everything else is still sort of growing.
Every business I've ever raised capital for since the first business is still around or exited today, and none of them are on life support, so it's a good sign.
Great.
I'm sure some of them will fail. No, I hope not.
So, now, another interesting thing has sort of been, not just what type of money you've raised and the market timing of it, but where you've raised money. You've raised money all over the world. You've raised it in Silicon Valley, you've raised it in Silicon Beach, you've raised it in Singapore. What's your sort of philosophy for people sitting here in Las Vegas who perhaps have just thought there's Vegas and there's Silicon Valley and that's it?
Well, I remember I was meeting with Roy Furman, who was the vice chairman of Jefferies, and he's been, in the world of finance for a long time. An older guy, full of amazing sort of lines. And he's like, Brock, when the market is open, you go to market. And the idea is when money is available and it's interested in coming into your deal, you take it, because it's kind of like when you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you feel like going to the convenience store. Guess what? It's not open. You kind of work around the schedule of the resources that you're ultimately going to need. And in the case of raising money outside of the U.S., when the 2008 financial crisis occurred, raising capital here in this country was very difficult. So we started raising money from Russian oligarchs and Chinese billionaires, and you go where the money is, and that's right now the Middle East, Asia, and Russia. Though the U.S. is now financing startups again.
Although it's very interesting the way it's financing startups. I mean, you see, companies with no revenue that are we're almost back to this .com eyeballs thing again. Flipboard today just raised $50 million on an $800 million valuation. I don't think they have any significant revenue. You've got, Snapchat, almost $1 billion valuation, no revenue whatsoever. Obviously, though, Instagram got sold for $1 billion with no revenue because Facebook knew how to get revenue pretty quickly. What's your sort of thought on where we're going here? Is this heading down the .com path again, or is there a difference?
A huge difference. What you have in the case of the companies you talked about, normally businesses that lack a revenue model are going to have a very difficult time securing financing, and the exception to that rule are the companies that you're talking about, companies that have aggregated massive audiences that are growing at incredible rates. Investors say, well, the fact that you're building up that large an audience and you have this level of momentum, we're willing to take the risk and make the bet that you'll be able to figure out a revenue model. But that rule only applies to businesses that are growing and reaching the types of numbers of users that you're talking about. Facebook being another example of that, Twitter being another example of that. So if you have a business that is tapping into a sort of a consumer need and building up an audience of north of 100 million people, hundreds of millions of people, you can live without it, but otherwise you typically need one.
I mean, a little aside, as I saw Larry Page pitch at the Dow Jones VentureWire conference before he got funded by Sequoia for Google, and was just talking about algorithms and making a better search engine. And someone asked, how are you going to make money? And it's like, well, we're not really sure yet, but we feel if we have the best search, we'll find the revenue model.
If you're going after a big enough idea that's going to reach that many users. So yeah, I think there's a huge difference. In the .com boom, there was not a lot of rationale behind those businesses. I mean, the businesses that are getting funded today because the ecosystem is further evolved. Yeah, sometimes bad businesses are getting funded because people are taking risks, and that's just the nature of startups. Most of them fail, but I think the markets are fairly rational. I don't think that we're in the midst of a bubble by any means.
So I'm going to switch a little bit now to you having the other hat on as an investor. At what point in your career did you sort of go from saying, okay, I've had a few successes, I want to now go and invest in other companies instead of spend all my money on my own companies?
I mean, I've been angel investing since the mid-2000s. Generally, I wasn't very active because it's a full-time job if you want to be an active investor, so I would invest occasionally, and it was typically in deals where I was friends with the founders. And I had a front row seat too in watching the businesses as they were developing. I normally wouldn't look at things that I wasn't already familiar with. I guess I became more active in recent years, and part of that was eventually putting on a venture hat as well. So it's led to doing that. But I'm pretty narrow in the areas I invest. I invest in games, I invest in gambling, I invest in digital currency, and then I sometimes invest in infrastructure plays, but only in infrastructure that I understand. I've spent $100 million doing media buying, and I've also had businesses that were selling advertising through ad networks and things of that nature, so I know the ad ecosystem, and so I'll sometimes make investments in that space. I've processed billions of dollars of transactions, and as a result of that I understand the payments ecosystem. So I really only invest in sectors that I understand, and most of the time I understand the entrepreneur's business better than they do. So it doesn't take me very long to form an opinion about the business. When I look at things outside of the sectors I know, quite frankly, I just don't think I'm very good, because most of the ideas I hear all sound really good, and they can't all be good. And it's because I just don't know, the fundamental flaws or, the issues in the sector and why things would likely fail.
So in the
I kind of sat there starting to thinking about, okay, the world's kind of crashing from a financial perspective. What are the opportunities that are going to be created as a result of it? So I spent a lot of time thinking about kind of finance and credit markets and how just things like, if you take the ad, I don't know if any of you were running or involved with, call it an online publisher at the time, I'm sure some of you have been. The ad networks and the WPPs of the world went from paying net 90 to paying net 180. I mean, there were a whole bunch of things that were going on that were really hurting the ecosystem, and starting to think about opportunities in terms of creating a specialty finance business to basically finance that working capital. One of the other things that I spent a lot of time thinking about was Western governments are broke. They're going to be looking for new sources of revenue. What are those likely to be? And that's where gambling became a focus of mine. I'm like, gambling already occurs, it's a significant source of revenue, and it's one where you don't have to spend any time waiting for the market to mature. The consumer demand is there today, and it's also one of those sectors where the local or federal governments get to double tax it, making it very attractive. And so I said, I'm going to make a bet that Western governments are going to be legalizing internet gambling, A, because the governments are looking for that new source of revenue, and B, the incumbent operators, the casinos here in Vegas and elsewhere, have found their businesses impacted in a way that they're looking to expand. And they've been impacted by people traveling, Asians going more to Macau than coming here to Vegas, people in the Northeast going to local casinos rather than coming to Vegas, the local casinos in places all around the country going from being the sole operator to now having 3 casinos. All of these businesses were finding, kind of the growth waning or even contracting in some way. And in Europe, one thing that had happened is because it was a little more liberal, you did have iGaming or internet gambling, and in the way that everyone thought it would cannibalize their business, it didn't really. It kind of augmented it, much in the same way that people thought that when they would put baseball or sports on television, people would stop going to the game, or in the way that when there'd be home video distribution, people would stop going to the movie theaters. They were different experiences. And so I figured the casinos were also going to be supportive of this, and those being the 2 main sort of constituencies that would need to support it to move forward. And so that started doing what I do, break down the value chain, break down the ecosystem, form opinions about how it would evolve, and then started making bets in the areas that I found viable. As far as the US was concerned, I figured out very early on that new entrants and startups would not be running internet casinos. The existing incumbent, well, the federal government wasn't likely to do anything. It was going to happen on a state-by-state basis. And that whoever the existing incumbent was going to be they would be the exclusive group able to operate. So here in Nevada, you need to be a land-based regulated casino. In California, you need to be an Indian tribe or you need to be a card club. If you're in Delaware, gambling is controlled by the state lottery. So in each state, whoever the existing incumbent is would be the only one allowed to operate. But that doesn't mean there's not a lot of opportunity around that ecosystem. I mean, you have the global gambling industry is roughly $1 trillion when you include the informal operators. So I mean, it's a very, very big sector, and of that, about 40 billion of it is occurring online today, and that online piece is becoming a larger and larger percentage of the overall sector. So I mean, it's a big business. So take, for example, Europe. The marketing companies and the affiliates that are driving the traffic into the internet casinos represent about 30% of all the internet gambling revenue generated in Europe, and they typically generate that revenue on a 60 to 70% margin. So there's going to be huge opportunities around operators here in the US driving customers into those casinos. That's a $5 to $10 billion business in Europe today, and I suspect it'll be a $5 to $10 billion business here in the US over the next 5 to 10 years. So there's a lot of opportunity in and around what I'd call the global macro trend of gambling, internet gambling liberalization.
So you're out here this week for G2E, which is the largest U.S. show for this industry, for the traditional gambling industry. Every time I've gone, even the last couple of years, it's still IGE and some of the other competitors and Konami who still basically have boxes. I mean, maybe they've got some network connections between them, but it's still a brick and mortar world. Will this be the year that there's a sea change, or is it going to be still sort of slow going until the world you described where online drives to offline or online becomes the lion's share?
I think we're still pretty far away. I mean, it's a slow-going process. I mean, you're dealing with one thing I wouldn't want to do is I want to get into the gambling business. I'm happy to make a bet in this business, but I don't want to bet on when governments are going to legislate something. It could be a long way. When we talked about market timing, you may find yourself waiting 5 years before you generate revenue. The existing operators are clearly doing well. The IGTs, WMS, Bally's, Aristocrats, and sort of the systems integrators are making bets in the space. Caesars, for example, has made 3 acquisitions in the online space. IGT acquired a company called Double Down for $500 million. They did that last year. Double Down was an 18-month-old company that only raised $900,000. And so they're all starting to make acquisitions. They're starting to make bets as they prepare for the eventual liberalization or legalization of internet gambling. But I don't think we're going to see meaningful revenue here in the U.S. coming from iGaming for 3-4 years probably.
And the person you chose to run Playsino came from?
Yeah, so Playsino is a company I started which one of the ways that we're taking advantage of this trend is we build casino games for Facebook, iPhones, Android tablets, Kindles, Nooks, etc., but they're for play money. So if you think of Zynga Poker, we make bingo games, slot games, poker games, where you can come and play, you get a certain amount of free chips every day. When you run out of those chips, you have the ability to buy more, and it's not considered gambling because in gambling there's basically 3 legs to the stool. One is there has to be consideration, you have to pay something. The second is the outcome has to be random, chance. And the last is there has to be reward or prize. If you eliminate any one of those elements, you're fine. So in the case of social casino games, you can spend money. The outcome is random, but you could never win anything. So this is a casino that never allows anyone to win. And if you'd asked me 5 years ago, is that a model that would work? I would have said, I don't think so. Who would want to, gamble with real money when the house wins 100% of the time? Which is kind of still the case, but I wouldn't have understood that, and it's because my understanding of gambling wasn't really there. And what I've come to realize as a result of this is that winning money is actually not what causes most people to gamble. They're playing, it's an entertainment experience. The amount that you're likely to spend may vary somewhat, but it's an interesting statistic. 20% of all revenue coming from games on Facebook and mobile come from play money casino games. it's massive. It's not a small percentage of people that want to do this, it's a massive number of people. And why I find that business interesting is you're aggregating every player in the US that likes to play casino games in advance of gambling becoming legal. When it becomes legal online, all of these casinos are going to be looking for people that like to play casino games. And the businesses that have aggregated those audiences in advance that have that database, I think are going to become very valuable. And my view there is I didn't want to be dependent or reliant upon government legislation. So I was looking for businesses that were great businesses today, but would be the biggest beneficiaries of internet gambling becoming legal. And the social casino segment was just that. It's the fastest growing segment of the games business, and it's going to increase in value substantially as internet gambling becomes legal as each state falls or opens up.
Okay. So you said a little bit earlier when you were talking about internet gambling that you didn't want to bet on something that it might take 5 years for the government to figure out, and yet you're starting Bitcoin companies. So I was interested in sort of what your take on Bitcoin was. I mean, you're the person actually who got me into the Bitcoin world, and I started a group called Bit Angels, which Barack is now one of the prominent investors in, and you've been very vocal in Bitcoin panels. You're one of the first earliest people in Bitcoin before anybody knew it was worth anything. And yet there's still a lot of regulatory risk there, but there's huge opportunities. So why don't you talk a little bit about your view on going from really the father of virtual currency to this big play that you're at least considering in the digital currency realm?
Well, I think Bitcoin has the potential to be the sort of biggest thing in the world of technology since the emergence of the internet. I'm not saying it will be. I think that it has the potential to be that massive. I mean, it could be a multi-trillion-dollar market in terms of activity, and most technologies don't have that potential for scale. I think there's, and I can get into as deep as you want to get into the Bitcoin sort of economy and where those views come from, but from a regulatory perspective, I don't have an issue with Bitcoin. I don't, and that's because I think the opportunity is there, the demand is there, and from a regulatory perspective, the only country I get nervous about is the US. I equate Bitcoin, and it looks similar in a lot of ways to internet gambling in the early 2000s, before this thing called UAGA, or the Unlawful Internet Gaming Enforcement Act of 2006 was put in place, which crashed a lot of the London stock market and all the gaming companies that had gone public there. And so the way that I'm dealing with that is I just don't touch the US. All my Bitcoin companies are based in Singapore, and we don't work with US customers until I get a better sense of what's going on there, or more importantly, I've followed all of the regulations. I'm not sure I'd look good in orange.
Well, what's really interesting, of course, about the Bitcoin world and its parallel and lack of parallel to the internet gaming space is that when the feds decided, okay, they want to shut down people who are not the incumbents, who they don't understand, they want to shut it down, they were able to shut down people operating offshore by simply telling MasterCard and Visa, you're not taking something coming in from Costa Rica. Can't really do that with Bitcoin.
Well, I mean, that they were offshore, but servicing and providing services to US customers. I'm not just offshore, I basically don't want US customers, and I don't allow US customers to work with most of those businesses. And I also don't think that Bitcoin, the US is the largest market in the world for Bitcoin today, but I don't think that will continue to be the case. It's because US consumers are often the most, and entrepreneurs and just everybody here, we're early adopters of technology, and it's because we're a very innovative sort of culture. And that's why probably we're the largest market for Bitcoin today, but Bitcoin doesn't have that much utility here. I really think of Bitcoin as being less of a digital currency, and it's more of a digital commodity. It's more like gold than it is a US dollar. Gold doesn't really have any intrinsic value. I mean, it has little. The reason why gold is valued the way that it is because for thousands of years we've all kind of agreed and used it as a means of storing value. The intrinsic value in gold is what? Some jewelry. It conducts electricity. I mean, it's maybe 1% of the value of gold is actually tied to its intrinsic uses. Bitcoin has no intrinsic value, but I don't think there's a big difference between both of them. The problem with gold is it's hard to carry a lot of it around in your pocket. It's easy to counterfeit, so you have to test it. And if you wanted to pay for something with it, what are you going to shave off? Bring a sharp knife with you and slice off a piece. What Bitcoin is I think of it as being similar to gold 2.0. It's a commodity that's really easy to carry around. It's very easy to break up. It can't be counterfeited. So it has all the same sort of utility as gold, but just 100 times better. And it's got a lot of other uses beyond that, but more in places where banking and payment infrastructure is not very evolved. In Indonesia today, only 17% of the population has a bank account. And you'll see a lot of countries in the emerging markets that are similar to this. And in the same way, they leapfrogged the layering of fiber optic cable in places like Africa and went straight to wireless with mobile. I think that you'll see a lot of payment sort of infrastructure and banking infrastructure leapfrog in the same way. And Bitcoin, I think, is a potentially viable solution to that. And if it's not Bitcoin, it'll be something else like it. So the markets that I care most about are the emerging markets. I like Southeast Asia, I like China, I like Africa, I like Latin America, Eastern Europe. And so from my perspective, not working with US users is not really important because that's not where I see the market opportunity.
Okay. So last set of questions. We're going to go from opportunities abroad to Las Vegas where we sit. You, despite all your massive globetrotting, I remember once running into you on a plane and you told me that you had done 40 red-eyes to Asia that year, which is pretty impressive.
I've got a lot of frequent flyer miles and status on almost every airline.
But among your frequent flyer miles, you're here about once a month.
Yeah.
And and you also spend a lot of time in Santa Monica. Our offices are actually, our Santa Monica office and his Santa Monica office are about, what, 700-800 feet apart?
Actually, I think I've got 6 offices within 2 blocks of your office.
This is true. So Silicon Beach, which 2 or 3 years ago was not really a technology haven of any sort, and now it's arguably in the top 5 or 6 in the country in terms of just really astounding infrastructure that has startups working together and angel investors looking for deals that you can approach and gets stuff funded fast. And traditional VCs, I mean VCs moving from Northern California, moving in from the Valley, moving in from Orange County to Santa Monica. Las Vegas looks a little bit like what Silicon Beach did a couple of years ago. It obviously got kicked off by 2 things, by Tony Hsieh selling Zappos and then starting to plow $350 million back into the city. And then also, as we sit here with our sponsors at Switch, really creating this huge cloud infrastructure and this lovely facility for incubating cloud companies. And those have really made a huge difference. I mean, when I moved here 7 years ago, if somebody asked me what's going on with technology, I go, well, a few tech guys at the casinos, that's about it. Now it's a technology town, particularly for early stage startups in e-commerce and in some other related areas. What would your advice be to Las Vegas to sort of move to the next level?
Well, I think Vegas has got a bunch of interesting things going for it. I mean, specifically the tax rates rising all over the country. It's almost every day I'm having a conversation with, an entrepreneur, typically one that's starting to have a business to do that begins to do well. Going, I really should move to Vegas. There's a lot of people that would like to leave California and move their businesses here. So that's a huge advantage. To the extent that you're successful, you're going to be retaining a lot more of the value that you've created. Certainly, it requires, you need the sort of people that are supporting the ecosystem, and what Tony Hsieh I think is doing. The fact that I'm in this office here today says that there's a lot of sort of momentum building up around startups, and it's probably the same spark that occurred in Silicon Beach, and that is probably Facebook. The value that Mark created in building that company has kind of reinvigorated the market of people wanting to become entrepreneurs. Being an entrepreneur is cool again. And so I think all of these markets where you've got at least people at the top of the ecosystem that are trying to support it, have the potential to blossom. And I'm assuming that that's the same thing that's occurring here. It's become very popular, and there's other things that have led, I think, to that, and that's ultimately that it used to cost a lot of money to start a business in the tech space. Now with open source and software as a service and kind of you can get a business up and online with a minimally viable product very quick, very inexpensively to determine if you get traction, which I think is the one reason why it's not a bad idea, for people to be looking at being an entrepreneur. The bar to getting into the business has lowered to the point that it's very accessible. And that was not the case until really the last few years. Again, cloud has been driving, you didn't have, just finding a hosting facility in the cost that used to be extraordinarily high. Now you got Amazon.
I would say that the sort of initial seed of the Santa Monica community starting to grow was when Applied Semantics sold to Google in, I think it was 2004, which then became AdSense. And that then put a Google office right in Santa Monica on 6th Street, and it grew, and now is a huge part of the multi-$100 million funding of all the Hollywood companies and stars and startups. The whole viral world now is sort of relocated to Venice in Santa Monica. And so, Zappos sale didn't happen until 5 years after that.
In LA, our biggest challenge is finding tech people, because we have plenty of them. But that doesn't mean that those are the only types of businesses that can do well there. But naturally, that's kind of what fueled a lot of the ecosystem, because you can build a good business just about anywhere, as long as you're in a big city and there's sufficient talent available.
Yeah, by the way, that's the other show that's in Vegas this week, is the ERA, which is the infomercial show, and the whole industry is basically headquartered in Santa Monica, but they come to Vegas for the shows. And that's another strong point. That
we all need an excuse to have some fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, beside the infrastructure of the e-commerce that Zappos created, and the tech talent that's been brought here because of that, because of the low cost of living and the low tax rate, another unique thing about Vegas is the fact that 1/4 of all the trade shows are here. There's a burgeoning hospitality industry, and so obviously everybody in the room, it's your benefit to sort of take that and take it to the next level.
Yeah, B2B businesses, you have never-ending customers coming to you. The fact that you've got, I love coming to trade shows here. It's an easy way to get 30, 40 meetings done in a very short period of time and touch everyone in a sector. If my businesses were operating out of Vegas, from an enterprise sort of sales perspective, it would probably be the most efficient way of conducting sales. And you could probably conduct sales here easier than just about anywhere in the world.
Yep. So we've got 10 minutes for questions. I'll open it up to the audience here. Questions?
So talking about raising funding and how you look at what you give up in the company for what you can build with it, basically. I guess it's me and my partners who always kind of disagree on the idea. How much do you give up of your business for a particular amount of money? And my approach was, if the idea is big enough, it doesn't matter how much you give up if the potential earning is there. What is your perspective on that?
I think your view is spot on, within reason. I look at building businesses and their success as essentially being binary. It's either a 0 or a 1. It's a failure or a success. And anything I can do to optimize toward a success, I do. I don't try to over-negotiate. I'm happy to leave money on the table because I care more about getting things done quickly and in an efficient way rather than trying to over-optimize, because you just end up burning time and it ultimately usually leads to your failure. So I kind of just try to get things done quickly. I'm fair and reasonable. I rarely over-negotiate, if I negotiate even at all, because I've already determined this is what I need to move my business forward, and I care less about making that deal 2% better, or 5% better, or 10% better. It's either something that is a major priority and essential to leading to your company's success. And normally there's 3 things at any one time. What are the 3 most important things that are going to move your business forward? And as long as I'm checking any one of those boxes, it's just get it done and move on. Because I don't care at the end of the day if I own 10% of the business or 20% of the business. All I care about is, was it a success or a failure? So I optimize to success. And but within reason, you can't give up too much of the business too early on, because you may have to raise further money down the road and you'll find yourself in a position where you've got so little ownership that you're no longer incentivized to work on the business anymore. So you can't give up everything. But I give up whatever I normally have to move the ball forward. And if someone wanted so much of the business that it didn't make sense, it probably means what I'm working on is the business is just not going to work, and I should probably move on anyway and let it go.
It's also an opportunity cost. I'm an advisor to one company that recently raised $1 million on a $5 million valuation with $6,000 a month in sale. It took them 80 meetings with VCs to get that done in almost a year. they got what they did, but what kind of opportunities did they lose? On the other hand, I'm chairman of this media company where I have a substantial ownership stake, and I asked the CEO, I said, do you want to get a 20 or 30% higher valuation and get it done in 6 months, or do you want to get kind of a no-brainer valuation and get it done in 6 weeks? She chose the latter. I went to New York. I got a check with every meeting I was in.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're not as long as you're not giving up more than, half the business in your seed financing, and typically it's a third, and it's almost always a half anyway when you include option pools and things of that nature. But if you're giving up a third of your business to get enough of that funding in to, kind of get to, some milestone or data point that, demonstrates that the business has got legs, I mean, that's fine. I mean, I won't, I'm happy often on a startup to take, money in at $1 million pre just to get it done in a day. I'll take in $250K on $1 million pre, done, let's go get a minimally viable product in place, see if this thing works and move on. I don't ever really try to optimize valuation unless I've got 2 or 3 offers and people are competing. But most of the time, the first person I meet with that agrees to do the deal, I just say done and move on. And then if someone else comes along and offers me a better term, I normally just work with the original partner. Because from back to a reputational and relationship perspective, it goes a long ways. When they know that you're not going to take their term sheet and go, try and shop it. Most of my investors, make commitments on a first meeting if I offer them a great deal.
John?
Thank you, Mike. Failure is part of the learning experience being a startup. One of the tough things is when do you decide to actually give it up? I've known people who just will not give up. They take care of their investors, but that's a tough decision. When do you actually give it up?
Well, I mean, I believe in failing fast. Fail as fast as you can, because you don't want to act opportunity cost and that being your opportunity cost. You want to figure out if your business is viable as fast as possible. I mean, I was just in Atlanta over the weekend and helping a few friends with their business, and their business was getting some big deals done with some big partners, but in every one of those instances, it's because of some of their investors and board members. They had very high-level relationships, and they were calling in favors and getting deals done. I said, you need to build up a sales force and start talking to real customers that are making a decision to work with you on the merits of your business, because you may spend the next 5 years of your life working on this business, and it survives because you've got enough, high-level people involved that they can, kind of keep the thing kicking. But at some point, you want to see where the rubber hits the road here, so you can, determine whether or not you should really be in this business. Try and, prove it out on its own, and fail fast so you can move on. I mean, you should shut down a business as soon as you realize it's not a good business. So there's a few things that you're looking for there. You're going, hey, I have an idea. I think there's a demand for this product and service, whether it be, enterprise B2B or B2C, and you find out whether or not there's demand for that product and try to figure out what the total addressable market is. And you want to be looking at these things constantly. And when you determine at any point the business doesn't look viable, you should, either pivot, try and sell it, shut it down, return what money is left to investors. That actually,
or keep it as a lifestyle business. I mean, there's a lot of lifestyle businesses that you just need to bootstrap and stay profitable. But if you can't look an investor straight in their eye and say, here's my numbers, and I can get you 10 times your money back in the next 5 years, and they look and they say, oh yeah, and I think you're actually lowballing this, then you really shouldn't be raising money on it.
Yeah, I mean, when you switch to a lifestyle business, it's challenging if you've raised money. Then you have to figure out, hey, this is going to be a lifestyle business. You go to your investors and you put in place some sort of plan of how you're going to, when you figure that out, and normally you can only do that if you have a revenue model and it's profitable, you just determine it can't scale. You figure out a model to pay back your investors with some sort of return out of whatever you're generating, because they don't want to sit in a lifestyle business where essentially all the profits are going to pay your salary. That's one sure way to ensure that they're not going to fund you in the future. And more importantly, when part of the reason again I do fairly well in raising money is because I'm going back to people that I've worked with before. You're going to have the most success in raising money from people that you've developed a relationship with and that you've known for some time. When you start cold calling people, it's a long process to raise money, and eventually, and if you are going through the cold calling process, they're often going to want to have references, and they're going to want to talk to people that have invested with you in the past. And that can be, you've lost money for those investors. But they'll say, no, he or she, you worked really hard, you did your best with the business, you executed well, but the business just wasn't viable. I mean, 9 out of 10 deals that are venture-backed more or less fail. And VCs are typically only investing in things that look like they're sure things or great investment opportunities. So it's not unusual to lose money. It's how you lose money. It's how you communicate with investors, and ultimately, do they think you did your best? And then, it also depends. Did you raise money from people that understand the venture world and that risk? There are some people that don't understand that the odds are they're going to lose their money when they invest in a project like any of the things that we work on. Network, being in places like this is, it's a good sign that you're doing the right thing. Get out there, meet people, develop relationships, nurture those relationships, and networking is an important aspect of being an entrepreneur until you get into the position where it's a nose down grind, which you'll go in and out of those phases.
One last question, then we'll get to networking. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out what you knew about that Shark Tank show and what you thought about that.
Shark Tank?
Yeah.
I think it's very entertaining.
Okay, good.
I mean, it's depending upon what your business is. I think it's great. I mean, most of the types of businesses that I think that go on to Shark Tank are, kind of IP. I've got a product type business. They're not normally sort of venture type businesses. They tend to be, some sort of product idea, something intellectual property like in nature, and it's a great way to get exposure for your business. I started a company called EverTune, which is a hobby more than anything else. But it's a technology that keeps any stringed instrument in tune forever. So we work on guitars, pianos, and if you utilize our technology, which is the bridge, you tune your guitar once and it will never go to tune ever again. And that's the sort of business that could have done well on a Shark Tank. But it's a
It may still get sold. I invested in that company.
Oh, I mean, it likely will. It's an incredible piece of technology. It's just not a very big business.
Yeah.
We won the Popular Science Best Invention of the Year award, New York Times. We have major artists like Joe Satriani, the list goes on and on and on, that will only play their guitars with this tech on it, because it's literally game-changing. I think 10 years from now, every guitar made will have it. But in a market that's $3 billion at retail, $1 billion at wholesale, meaning the guitar industry, we're a component. So if we had 100% market share and we run every guitar made, we'll do $20–30 million a year in revenue, and that's if we hit a grand slam. When that's the maximum level of success or the ceiling that your business is looking at, it's typically not venture backable. VCs want to invest in businesses that can become billion-dollar plus ideas. So they have to have extraordinary abilities to scale.
All right, thank you, Brock. And Brock will be around for a few minutes more. And go network. And I want to again thank our sponsors, Switch, for hosting us here. It's a wonderful facility. Get to know a little bit more about the company and about the Innovation Center and all the companies that are here. Also to our food sponsors, Meat Chicks, and to the global sponsor, Google, and also to Walls 360, local company here. Give it up for Walls, who got our wonderful removable graphics, and they do for trade shows and everything else, and Vegas Tech Company. Thank you very much. And next month, we're looking at, it says the 21st on the Startup Grind national site, international site. It's actually going to be October 14th. We're going to send it out. It is the same speaker, though, Scott Purcell, who's a Vegas resident, although his company's actually in Santa Monica now, and he is doing a crowdfunding site, which for those of you who don't know, today, September 23rd, is the first day you can actually put an ad out and say, I am raising money from angels. First day it's legal. Okay, thank you.